Maybe home isn't always a place. It's the people you trust the most.
Welcome, friends. We're back talking Star Trek Prodigy Season 2. Now we're up to episodes 15 and 16. This is the two-parter known as Ascension, parts 1 and 2. Now there will be spoilers ahead. If those aren't for you, take this as your last warning. Let's crack into the episode. Boy, oh boy, does this episode just kind of go off the rails and throw all the action at us in a 1-2 punch of just basically non-stop stuff. So we got that reconnection of Chakotay and Janeway last episode. We got to see a little bit more of that as they settle into their new roles. Jellicoe is taking away the Protostar mission from our crew. They need to come home to San Francisco. There's all sorts of other stuff going on, as we know from other Star Trek shows. The Romulan evacuation, it's mentioned by name. The forthcoming uprising of the synths. Now, we don't know there's going to be an uprising yet, but he distinctly mentions they are the only thing really holding together half of the Federation member worlds right now. A lot of good connections and world building. Wasn't a huge fan of how the Star Trek universe was restructured in Picard, especially leading off the events of Star Trek 2009. I don't believe Romulus should have been destroyed, but I digress. That's the world in which we live in now. Just have to roll with the punches and exist within that universe. And with everything going on in this series, it could be retroactively fixed with all the timeline shenanigans. We got to see all of our characters in significant action, forwarding the momentum of the plot here, and we get our sub-boss, our behind-the-scenes main boss, not entirely certain which it'll turn out to be, but Ascension comes back into the fray. She swoops in with her new ship, the Shrike Rada. Yes, it looks like the Shrike combined with a Narada. However, interestingly enough, the design of this ship, coupled with some of the technology it utilizes later in the episode, specifically being that energy netting or whatever, very reminiscent of Tholian technology. Now, I don't know if that's supposed to be distinctly based on Tholian technology. We know that they are linked to the interphasic space that we saw way back in their first appearance, and an interphasic rift was the thing that broke time. We know that Ascension is using time technology, so is there a connection there, or am I just overthinking a very cool aesthetic choice? I want to see a heck of a lot more Tholians than we are getting in Star Trek. Personally, I would have liked them over the Gorn in Strange New Worlds. Again, talking about things that are completely irrelevant to this episode. This was a very impactful way to kind of show everything is coming to a head. So we have our Voyager A, we have Chakotay and some of the crew going over to the Protostar. We have some of our cadets, Nova Squadron. Now Dahl has to kind of take over for Grom, I think is his name. He was injured, so Dahl had to take over. And this is really, I think, where Dahl flourishes. That little timey-wimey glimpse of his future he saw that kind of led him down a path of not feeling like his future was going to be all he wanted it to be. I think personally that this episode, the events of this episode, plus that space race and a whole bunch of other things, are going to lead him down the path of feeling like this is his calling. He is not actually meant to be a captain. Maybe he'll become one down the line. Gwyn is definitely the one that's more fitting of that role. Dahl is definitely more of that cocky, hotshot fighter pilot type characterization we've seen in a lot of things. I think we're going to see Dahl come to the realization that this is his true calling. A quick side tangent again, I've never been a huge fan of having these smaller fighter craft within Star Trek. I know it's a staple of just sci-fi in general, specifically things like Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica. I always kind of preferred Star Trek to shy away from that because they're kind of doing their own thing without bringing in those elements. It worked for me here. I don't think it's a bad thing if it's utilized correctly in a storyline, and they utilized it very well here. Obviously, you're probably going to run into species with just wave after wave of these smaller support craft. It just feels like something that hadn't been established for so long within Star Trek. To suddenly introduce it is a little jarring, but it absolutely worked for the storyline they're trying to tell here. Our various crews and our various ships trying to cobble together some form of defense from this time anomaly version of Ascension. They have technology that is way beyond anything they should have, and it's revealed the reason for this is because Ascension is somehow controlling and mining and using Wesley Crusher, the Traveler version of Wesley Crusher, as some sort of time battery or something. That is an interesting concept. The episode is such a fast-paced endeavor. We don't really have time to sit with it and mull over all the implications on how this occurred and what it could potentially mean for the future of the franchise, this battle, all of that stuff. It kept us on our toes so much that we just had to take the information as it was presented to us, and it really leaves you with a feeling at the end of the episode, even though our crew and our team was successful based on Majel being that seventh piece, that seventh component that really did render everything here victorious. Had Majel not been here to implement her plan of luring the time splinter away and seeking out the Shrike Rada and destroying that instead, our team probably would have fallen here. I don't know if all of them would have died, but it absolutely would have led to the downfall of the entire timeline. So that was the reason, or at least one of the reasons, Majel is such a vital component of this team. We got to see a lot of cool callbacks and implementation of prior Star Trek stuff. We had Binars here. We had the Boothby supernova. So not only a reference to the original Nova Squadron with their whole supernova maneuver, but also a very fun call out to Boothby, his character as well. The holodeck effects in animation, great. It's a really nice utilization of that to show us more than they ever could in a live action series. The Doctor here offering Zero the ability to keep sensations and to take any form. This leads to an interesting question. The Doctor says this is an ability that the Federation now has, to build some sort of artificial form with sensory inputs. Leading me to the question, is the Doctor going to take on some sort of augmented form with the ability to sense things before the end of the season? Or is that something that's just kind of dropped in the canon and maybe somewhere down the line that'll be picked up and run with? The discussion of Endgame, the very final episode of Voyager, was a great close-the-loop moment that also kind of raised a couple of other questions in a good way, in a way that allows us to kind of think about the universe a bit more than was really presented before. They mentioned that the uniforms and the comm badges, as shown in that episode in the future timeline, the one in which Admiral Janeway came back to save our crew, are the influence and the inspiration for the uniforms and comm badges being used in this current timeline. So had she not come back from the future, obviously all of the events from the finale of Voyager wouldn't have taken place the way we saw them. However, that also means all of the technology and the uniforms and all of that stuff was altered from this point. Now, this is interesting on a couple of fronts because most every time travel episode that changes something in the history of Star Trek probably has altered the flow of the course of time for the rest of the series forward. The battle utilizing beam phasers and quantum torpedoes, absolutely fantastic to see. I hate when they shy away from that in Star Trek, so to bring it back just so fully here, not just the beam phasers, because that's something that they drop quite a bit for the pew-pew kind of pulse phasers, quantum torpedoes. Heck of a lot of the time, even in like future Discovery, they've been falling back on photon torpedoes, and I know that's the one that's most well known as far as the franchise goes, but quantum torpedoes was established, I think, in the movies, maybe DS9, but I want to say it was the movies, so to have that still being utilized in this timeline just felt right to me. Now, the big emotional gut punch of this episode has to be the Zero revelation or the resolution of that physical form storyline. They volunteer themselves as a sacrifice to go into the accelerated time stream where the torpedo is going to blow up Voyager in order to deactivate it. Now, this is interesting because they even have a line from the Doctor here saying, I would do it myself, but all the holo emitters have rusted over and decayed within there. That was a nice touch because A, that was probably the most logical choice of someone to send into this situation, and B, he did a very similar thing in Eye of the Needle back in Voyager. He was sent into an accelerated timeline. All they had to do was kind of change the frequency of his program or the refresh rate or something like that. I always really like these little touches, similar to how Chakotay referenced his events in Shattered. It just feels like they are acknowledging these things have occurred within their past within Star Trek, and it's not just a brand new event they have no recollections of. So we see Zero basically wasting away to nothing, trudging through this altered timescape. Now, interestingly enough, it's accelerated time, but it doesn't appear that the person within this is actually experiencing the accelerated time. It's not like the person within this time stream is actually experiencing years of their life. They're just experiencing the effects of that amount of time. At the end of the day, that body expires, and Jankum has created the sort of similar looking Zero Encounter suit, just completely decked out with full sensory input. That is seemingly going to be their new existence going forth. Obviously, that's going to probably lead to some interesting conundrums, some interesting situations, but we don't have all that much time left before the end of the season, so who knows if they'll really have all that much time to experience it before the end of everything. I'm sure I skipped over a lot of really core important elements from this episode. There is just so much jam-packed in there, and so much just all coming to a head here. I can't really wait to see what happens next. With so few episodes left before the end of the season, I've kind of stalled myself into watching it because I just don't want this experience to end. What are you thinking of the show? Where do you think we are going from here? How do you think all of these time things are going to be rectified? And I really hope we get more in the future. We get a third season, we get some more follow-up on this, but if we don't, I am very, very hopeful it doesn't end on any sort of cliffhanger that really needs a resolution. Netflix doesn't like to do more than 3 seasons, but since technically this is a newly procured show, it is conceivable, based on that relationship they have with the Hagemans already, they may be willing to commit to something else in the future. I know I'm talking myself into circles here, but I am very optimistic this might not be the end we see of this. Leave all your thoughts down below, like, share, subscribe to all those fancy YouTube things, but until next time...
I am fully aware of our temporal predicament, but right now my concern is for the crew of Voyager.